You see, what will also happen as a result of this looming currency crisis and the end of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency is a massive inflation in America, the likes of which we have never seen before. When everyone is trying to get rid of their US dollars and our federal government just continues printing more, this crisis will reach epic proportions. No nation in history ever became wealthier by going deeply into debt and then printing the money required to repay the loans. Here's the important point to remember. What most people don't realize is that the U.S. government can only continue printing dollars as long as the U.S. dollar remains the world's reserve currency. I can't stress this enough. You need to act now in order to protect your assets and grow your savings in the next few years. Like I said, most Americans not only don't believe the U.S. dollar could ever lose its spot as the world's reserve currency, they don't even really understand what that means either. But I'm here to tell you, this is the biggest problem our country now faces, and it is clearly already underway. With the rising level of U.S. debt, many countries around the world are questioning the position of the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. They want to diversify out of the U.S. dollar as quickly as possible. The latest sign of a move away from the dollar as a reserve currency is that China and South Korea recently came to an agreement that allows firms to settle deals in either the Chinese yuan or the South Korean won instead of the U.S. dollar. The agreement is part of a push among emerging countries to internationalize local currencies after the global financial crisis, reports Bloomberg. Alan Wheatley, a global economics correspondent for Reuters, recently wrote, "Fed up with what it sees as Washington's malign neglect of the dollar, China is busily promoting the cross-border use of its own currency, the yuan. Displacing the dollar, Beijing says, will reduce volatility in oil and commodity prices and belatedly erode the exorbitant privilege the United States enjoys as the issuer of the reserve currency at the heart of a post-war international financial architecture it now sees as hopelessly outmoded. In fact, in the past couple of years, China has signed international currency agreements with Germany, Brazil, Russia, Australia, Japan, Chile, the United Arab Emirates, India, and South Africa. Japan and India also recently signed a currency deal, linking their currencies closer together and lessening their dependency on U.S. dollars. These agreements are part of a trend that started a few years ago when a group of the world's most powerful countries, including China, Japan, Russia, and France, got together for a secret meeting without the United States being present or even knowing about the meeting. Veteran Middle East reporter Robert Fisk reported on this event in Britain's newspaper, The Independent. Here's what he wrote. In the most profound financial change in recent Middle East history, Gulf Arabs are planning, along with China, Russia, Japan, and France, to end dollar dealings for oil, moving instead to a basket of currencies including the Japanese yen, Chinese yuan, the euro, gold, and a new unified currency planned for nations in the Gulf Cooperation Council, including Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, and Qatar. Fisk also interviewed a Chinese banker who said, "These plans will change the face of international financial transactions. America must be very worried. You will know how worried by the thunder of denials this news will generate." And sure enough, after Fisk published the details of this secret meeting, U.S. officials and central bankers from around the globe denied these plans. But, as the old central banking adage goes, how do you know exactly when a currency will be devalued? The answer is right after the head of the central bank goes on television to adamantly deny that any such transaction will occur. And guess who subsequently released a public statement about how the U.S. will not devalue its currency? Yes, you guessed it. U.S. Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner. You see, the last thing a central banker wants to do in the midst of a devaluation is to give people a warning before he can devalue. So they have to deny, deny, deny. After the announcement is made, it's too late for citizens and investors to get out. Then, not too long after this secret meeting was held, the International Monetary Fund issued a report on a possible replacement for the dollar as the world's reserve currency. I'm sure you recognize the significance of this event. The IMF, which is headquartered in Washington, D.C., is the intergovernmental organization that oversees the global financial system. They are the most influential financial organization in the world economy. The IMF has proposed replacing the US dollar with something called special drawing rights, or SDRs. SDRs represent potential claims on the currencies of IMF members. SDRs were created by the IMF in 1969 and can be converted into any currency based on a weighted basket of international currencies. When the IMF lends money, it typically does so via SDRs. The IMF also proposed creating SDR-denominated bonds, which could reduce central banks' dependence on U.S. Treasury bonds. The fund also suggested that certain assets, such as oil and gold, which are traded in U.S. dollars, could be priced using SDRs. This is a huge and important step to replace the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. I'm telling you, it's coming, and it's coming much sooner than most Americans expect. Most Americans simply aren't aware of what's being done and said around the world. For example, regarding the world's reserve currency, China issued a report through their state news agency, Xinhua, stating, "International supervision over the issue of U.S. dollars should be introduced, and a new, stable, and secured global reserve currency may also be an option to avert a catastrophe caused by any single country." It's just another sign of this inevitable event, the end of the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. Any government or investor with any sense is looking to get out of the U.S. dollar as quickly and safely as possible. China and Russia, for example, took one of their first big steps to replace the dollar back in 2010. China Daily reported, "The two countries were accustomed to using other currencies, especially the dollar, for bilateral trade. Since the financial crisis, however, high-ranking officials on both sides began to explore other possibilities. To settle their ordinary trading of about $50 billion per year, they no longer first convert to U.S. dollars. Since then, China has reached agreements with many other countries, as I mentioned earlier. Remember, they've already signed international currency agreements with Germany, Brazil, Russia, Australia, Japan, Chile, the United Arab Emirates, India, and South Africa. What does this mean? Well, it used to be that China had to obtain dollars to buy gas supplies from, say, Russia, but not anymore. And Russia no longer needs U.S. dollars to buy stuff from the Chinese. And this brings us to one of the biggest and most important facts regarding the U.S. dollar. As the dollar loses its place as the world's reserve currency, foreign countries will no longer need to maintain large holdings of dollars. This means we will no longer be able to print as much money as we want, because there will be fewer and fewer people willing to loan us large amounts of money. This move between China and other countries around the world would have been unthinkable 10 years ago, but today it's the new reality. As I'm sure you are aware, for years the U.S. dollar has been accepted almost universally around the globe. Heck, many times when I've traveled, I never even bothered to convert to the local currency because I knew everyone would take my dollars. Well, that's simply not the case anymore. For example, the Seattle Times reports that in Mexico, Americans are no longer allowed to exchange more than $1,500 per month. In India, the country's tourism minister said U.S. dollars will no longer be accepted at the country's heritage tourist sites like the Taj Mahal, and the U.S. dollar is no longer good anywhere in Cuba. China is moving in the same direction. Now, many shops in China no longer accept dollar-based credit cards issued by foreign banks, and foreigners cannot convert American dollars into renminbi beyond a given quota. Iran, of course, has already moved all of its reserves out of U.S. dollars, and Kuwait depegged its currency from the dollar a few years ago. And the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the world's largest futures and commodities exchange board, now accepts gold to settle futures contracts. Until recently, the exchange typically accepted only U.S. treasuries and bonds as payment. The guys at the Mercantile Exchange obviously see the writing on the wall. Again, this would have all been completely unthinkable 10 years ago, but today it's a reality, and this trend is going to keep moving incredibly fast. Just look at the actions taken by smart investors. Bill Gross, who probably knows as much about currencies and debt as anyone in the world, runs the world's biggest bond fund. He was quoted by Bloomberg not too long ago saying, "We've told all of our clients that if you only had one idea, one investment, it would be to buy an investment in a non-dollar currency. That should be on top of the list." Jim Rogers, one of the world's most successful multimillionaire investors, writes, "The dollar is not just in decline. It's a mess. If something isn't done soon, I believe the dollar could lose its status as the world's reserve currency and medium of exchange, something that would lead to a huge decline in the standard of living for U.S. citizens like nothing we've seen in nearly a century." I know, You probably still don't believe we can have a complete currency collapse here in the United States. But think about it. Are we as Americans really immune to the laws of economics and finance? I don't think so. And I'm not the only one saying this. The dollar's days as reserve currency are numbered, reports the Financial Times. And the Wall Street Journal recently ran a headline saying, "Dollar's reign as world's main reserve currency is near an end." I'm sure I don't have to tell you that the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal are probably two of the most respected financial newspapers in the world. They, too, see the writing on the wall. It's obvious to anyone who has studied any economic history. In every instance throughout history, when a government has tried to inflate its debts away, it has ended in disaster. Believe me, it will happen here too. As Jim Rogers says, history teaches us that such imprudent monetary and fiscal behavior has always led to economic disaster. This is why World Bank President Robert Zoellick, in a speech at the School for Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University, recently said, "The United States would be mistaken to take for granted the dollar's place as the world's predominant reserve currency. Looking forward, there will increasingly be other options to the dollar." And this is why the International Monetary Fund recently published a paper calling for a new global world currency. This is why big U.S. companies like McDonald's and Caterpillar have begun introducing what are called dim sum bonds. These are securities denominated in the Chinese currency, the renminbi, by non-Chinese borrowers. In other words, two of the biggest and most successful corporations in America realize they would have an easier time raising money by offering their bonds in a currency other than the U.S. dollar. Do you see where this is all heading? It's no mystery why gold and silver prices are soaring. And remember, this is all a result of capital flight. When people no longer trust a particular currency, they look for better and safer alternatives. Over the past 12 years, gold and silver have been much safer and far more profitable than holding U.S. dollars in the bank. Think about this. Gold prices have gone up for 12 straight years. No other asset in the world, as far as I know, has had a run like this in recent history. And why exactly is gold going up? The number one reason is because savvy investors around the globe realize the U.S. dollar is no longer a safe store of value. The point is, it's not a matter if the U.S. dollar will lose its status as the world's reserve currency. It's a process that is already underway. And if over the next few years you ignore these basic facts, these basic laws of finance and economics, it will simply destroy you. Investors, foreign governments, and large corporations know there are serious problems with the U.S. dollar. So they are fleeing to precious metals, which have historically been very reliable when a country has major currency problems. The good news, at least for those of us who take the time to prepare, is that no matter what happens, I found several ways for you to protect your savings, and you could even make 3 to 5 times your money over the next few years. I'll show you exactly what to do in a moment. But first, let me explain why the collapse of the dollar as the world's reserve currency could happen much sooner than most people expect.